Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 68 of the Hammer Territory podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday evening here in late August, and I'm joined by Scott Coleman. Scott, it was perilously close to the Braves taking a 2-0 lead in the series against the Phillies, and yet they had to settle for a split, and the vibes are lessened as a result.
Hey, Brad. Hope you are doing well. I hope everybody out there is doing well, other than maybe Corey Blazer, the home plate umpire who stunk it up behind the plate on Wednesday night. Why let an umpire get in the way of otherwise a really good competitive baseball game? But yeah, it's a bummer. Felt like the Braves were maybe on their way to, at very least, winning the series. But now they'll have to go on Thursday night and try to win it out. But two 50-50 games, and I guess each side has come away with at least one win so far.
Yeah, you could certainly argue that the quote-unquote right result, given the competitiveness of these first two games, was a split. I wouldn't argue against that necessarily. You brought up the umpiring, which we will probably come back to later on, even though that's not really RMO as a podcast, but certainly there was at least one big moment that nobody really enjoyed on the Braves side, and it was pretty bad all night long on both sides, I have to say, from that particular home plate umpire. But yeah, the Rays were a player or two away from cutting the deficit in the NL East to 5 games. That would have been pretty interesting. Still an underdog there, of course, but still, it does put emphasis on tomorrow, which we'll come back to at the end of the podcast. But the vibes are not dire. It is what it is. They won yesterday. Had they lost yesterday, Scott, as we're recording this podcast on Wednesday, had they lost Tuesday and Wednesday, the tone would be a lot worse. But that did not happen. And by the way, we are part of the Foul Territory network of podcasts. We should say that at the top of the show. If you are a new listener, welcome aboard. We definitely appreciate you being here. Please subscribe to this podcast anywhere you might find podcasts. Just search Hammer Territory on Apple, Spotify, Overcast, YouTube, etc. Rate and review as well. Tell your friends if you're a recurring listener, a returner, so to speak. Thank you for being here as always. Scott, you want to just dive into Tuesday's game? Because there's plenty to get to. We'll kind of take some offshoots along the way, but there's two games to discuss. And the last podcast that actually happened on this feed was the emergency show, unfortunately, about Austin Riley, which was dutifully handled by our colleagues, Steven and Sean. So down to business we go, I guess.
Yeah, down to business. And Tuesday night's game was really enjoyable. It was the third straight win for the Braves. And for me, the biggest takeaway was just how good Reynaldo Lopez looked, especially after the elbow scare just a couple of weeks ago.
For sure. That was definitely the headliner of Tuesday's game. A third straight win for the Braves, but Lopez going 5 innings is fine, of course. He hadn't pitched in about 3.5 weeks, but striking out 10 and being pretty electric all night. Reynaldo is not exactly known as a high strikeout pitcher, but he was missing bats all night long. Velocity was up, and then the bullpen was awesome as well, which we have to at least note. But I am totally with you that the standout of the evening on a night where the offense was just okay was Lopez, and there's a little bit of a reason to not necessarily worry, but not expect the world from Reynaldo after an absence, especially when it was not necessarily dominating before that. But man, he was very good against a very good offense.
It was super encouraging to see Lopez go out there and, I mean, just dominate a really good Phillies lineup. His velocity on Tuesday night was the best it has been all season long. His fastball averaged 96.4 miles an hour. And that's really encouraging because the velocity had actually started to dip a bit in the month before Reynaldo went down. So basically in the month of July, it had gone down a little bit. And then you combine that with a pitcher who is, of course, a former reliever and now starting again for the first time in many years. You had to kind of wonder if he was running out of gas. But maybe the 3 weeks away will do him a lot of good. He was as good as he has been on a per pitch basis as he has really been all season long. And if the Braves are going to have a healthy and rejuvenated Reynaldo Lopez down the stretch, it is only going to help their chances to chase down a playoff spot.
That's right, and I believe you pulled the stat, but 15 of his 21 breaking balls were whiffs by the opposition. That's pretty fantastic for anyone. So yeah, we've noted his excellence, but I was encouraged. It does kind of make sense that he would be up velocity wise after a little bit of a break. Obviously, kind of a fresh arm, despite all of the concerns about it. His next start will be of interest to me as far as how his stuff plays up, but certainly you can't argue with anything that happened in his first start back after that break. I mentioned the bullpen briefly, but literally 4 perfect innings from the bullpen two by Grant Holmes, who's been awesome for several weeks now, and then Jimenez and Iglesias to close it out. Our guy, especially defensively, Ramon Laureano closing it out with a nice little play on the final out of the game. Listen, the bases were empty. It wasn't like a game saver with a 2-run lead, but it was a good chuckle for everybody involved that he was the one that made a really nice play at the end.
He made a couple of nice plays in right field in that final inning. And, for Ramon, this is a guy who's been in the major leagues for 7 or 8 years now. He graded out historically as an okay defender. And I think really it was just kind of like a mental gaffe that he had had over the last couple of weeks, just overrunning baseballs in the outfield like you would expect from a T-ball team and not a big league outfielder with a lot of experience. So let's hope the defense solidifies. And offensively, Ramon has been really, really good. He's done a nice job filling in one of the corners. Of course, the Braves are still playing without Jorge Soler for the time being. So he's been out there basically every night now for a couple of weeks. And after about as bad of a start as I guess you can get with some of those horrendous plays defensively, it seems like Ramon has calmed down a bit out there. And the bat has really been good the whole time he's been with the team.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, I'm glad you pointed that out because Laureano does not have the reputation of being this butcher in the outfield. He's looked like that in a Braves uniform until Tuesday, but the metrics are not awful. He's not exactly Michael Harris out there, but certainly probably a little bit of unfairly poor start for him in the outfield, as you note there. The offense was not great on Tuesday. It was enough. Ozuna homered as Ozuna tends to do. Whit Merrifield had a good game, a double and a triple against his old team. He had some comments that made their way to Philadelphia. I'm sure you saw some Phillies fans like I did on Twitter during the game Wednesday, in particular, because he wasn't great Wednesday, and the Braves, of course, lost on Wednesday. So the Philly fans were doing their victory laps because Whit kind of just emphasized, as I think very naturally a professional athlete would, that it meant something to him that he was able to make some noise against a team that kind of they cut him earlier this year. That's just how it was. They moved on from him for performance reasons, and he said, I
Yeah.
believe the quote was, "I'd be lying if I said I did that it didn't matter to him," something like that. So that's pretty normal to me. I understand that's like part of the fun of the rivalry, and maybe this came back later on today with the Bryce Harper, Orlando Arcia back and forth that we're not going to talk about a lot, I don't think, on this podcast. But look, the Braves and Phillies don't like each other, and that's okay. It's how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, this is a great rivalry. Obviously, a ton of familiarity with these two teams. And I wanted to just take a quick moment to talk about Whit Merrifield, who, I mean, look, 3 weeks ago, we did a podcast after the trade deadline. And I think really all four of us on the show felt like the Braves should have added a infielder of some kind. And admittedly, there was not a ton on the trade deadline, but the Braves were putting a lot of eggs in the basket of Whit Merrifield and Nacho Alvarez. And so far, Whit Merrifield has been awesome, like full stop awesome. An OBP of about 400. So he's done a great job getting on base. His defense has been steady. He's fast, which is there's just no speed in this lineup other than maybe Michael Harris. And I guess Jared Kelnick can run a little bit, but by and large, this is a slow lineup. So you add in Merrifield's speed and the on base, which were two things that were greatly lacking. He has done a really nice job. Of course, once upon a time, Whit Merrifield was a full stop all-star for many years. And he's older now, and I don't think you can necessarily expect that. But as the Braves have had to deal with so many injuries, I mean, honestly, Whit Merrifield has performed better than what they were getting from Ozzie Albies. And eventually, Ozzy's going to come back and presumably take back the second base job. But it also feels like because Witt is playing so well, it's not like the Braves are counting down the hours until Ozzy comes back, because Witt's done a really good job, and he's clearly a guy who can be successful at this level.
For sure. And it's also going to be a talking point at some point when Ozzy comes back, maybe that you might see Witt go to third base some. And that is a good opportunity for us in a second to talk about the new arrival, Gio Urshela. Before we get to that, though, a word from our friends at Foul Territory on Viore.
Hey FT fam, it's Alana Rizzo. I can't stop talking about Vuori. Vuori is perfect if you are sick and tired of traditional old workout gear. I wear Vuori in all settings, not just in the gym, because honestly, it's comfier than whatever you're currently wearing. No joke. I'm wearing Vuori daily leggings right now. They're high-waisted with the drawstring and cupped ankles. They look good and they feel great. You're going to love them. Vuori is an investment in your happiness. For our listeners, they are offering 20% off your first purchase. Get yourself some of the most comfortable and versatile clothing on the planet at vuori.com/foul. That's VUORI.com/foul. Not only will you receive 20% off your first purchase, but enjoy free shipping on any U.S. orders over $75 and free returns. Go to vuori.com/foul and discover the versatility of Vuori clothing.
Okay, Scott, since the last time the Hammer Territory podcast convened, and it was Sean and Steven on Monday evening in emergency fashion about Austin Riley being out for the season effectively. Not officially out for the season, but out for most of the season, if not all. At the time, we didn't know what the Braves were going to do at third base, but as a shout out to Sean and Steven, they kind of called what was going to happen, at least maybe what could happen. That was the Braves signing Gio Urshela. It made a lot of sense for them to do that, but that has happened between podcasts. So let's spend a second talking about him. For one, he drew a bases loaded walk in his first game. He basically went from being signed to starting at third base and playing in a matter of hours on Tuesday, which was interesting. And he's been good so far. It's 2 games, but he's contributed at a high level so far. What did you make of this? Because we should probably take a step back and I was blown away. I even tweeted. I try not to tweet a ton these days. But I was confused by some of the negative reaction I saw from Braves fans because I don't know if you know this, Scott, but it's August and the options are not exactly plentiful on the available market when your star third baseman goes down. Like, what are you supposed to do?
Right. I joked with Steven. It's like, you mean to tell me that prime Nolan Arenado wasn't available to grab here in late August without a trade deadline anymore? Look, man, Gio Urshela, is he a star? No. Is he even above average at this point? Probably not. But he was, for my money, clearly better than what the Braves had internally. A player who a couple of years ago was pretty solid. He averaged about a 118 WRC plus and just over 2 WAR per season from about 2019 to 2022. So it's not like it was that long ago that he was a contributing regular in the majors. And for a Braves team that has just suffered so many injuries, the fact that you were able to at least add somebody externally who had just gotten released, sure. I mean, it'd be awesome if you could add an all-star, but that's basically impossible to do this time in the calendar. And, if you, really, for my money, just Gio catch the baseball, which he has done so far. And, if you can just give a little bit of offense in the bottom part of the batting order, you take it and hope the rest of the guys can cover up for it.
So before the break we took, you mentioned Whit Merrifield, and look, they're not exactly the same, but the situation is very similar. You got a guy who used to be good, or at least he used to be pretty good in Urshela's case, who's available for nothing on the market. You have a need, as the Braves did with Merrifield, because Ozzie went down, all those things. The parallels are pretty clear here. And I'm not saying that Urshela is going to be as good as Merrifield has been, because that'd be lofty. But, we did kind of mention, well, you and I did on the podcast, we talked about it offline, but Steven and Sean did mention the internal candidates. And without picking on guys, there just aren't any internal candidates that anybody's interested in. They're okay with Luke Williams as their backup infielder, but no one wants to see him play every day. Nacho Alvarez apparently has pneumonia, all kinds of nonsense with the internal options. And look, Urshela was not good this year for the Tigers. That is worth noting. That's how he became available, but that's what you're going to get. It's August, and with the changes in the basically, I guess there used to be these 2 deadlines. Now there's only one where you can't really even soft trade for someone this time of year. So there is some potential. We won't do the full deep dive here, but I would say his underlying data this year, his StatCast data, is better than his actual results were in Detroit. The expected stats are not fantastic, but they're okay. And all he has to be is okay because, obviously you're not going to replace Austin Riley. It is what it is. Sean and Steve talked about that too, but you got to just plug the hole and get by, and everybody else has to pick it up. It's a very easy point and shoot analysis. I understand that, but they have to just do what they can do. And given what the options were, it's like, yeah, take a shot. And if it doesn't work, you recycle the next thing. And if Urshela is not working when Ozzie comes back, I know that the Braves quickly kind of told the beat guys that they were not going to move Whit Merrifield to third base. I can promise you, if Urshela is floundering and they had no other options and Ozzie's back, they will consider moving Whit Merrifield to third base. Like they'll just do what they have to do.
Yeah. Well, it's very much beggars can't be choosers because the Braves are true. I mean, again, man, I don't have to tell listeners just how much this team has withstood to even be close to the playoff picture, let alone in it as we talk here at the end of August. Urshela, again, not a star. You just kind of hope that he can fill in and give you something because it was pretty clear that internally the Braves just didn't have any options. And who knows? You get Ozzie Albies back in a couple of weeks. You have time to evaluate Gio and see what he's been able to do. Who knows? Maybe Austin Riley can come back at the end of the regular season, get a couple games in, perhaps in a best case scenario type, and then presumably or hopefully then shift to a playoff series. We just don't know. But for the time being, you add Urshela for basically nothing. And very similarly to Merrifield and Ramon Laureano, you take a chance. And I mean, look, man, if Gio is just somehow completely awful, you move on. You're not committed to anything in any way, shape, or form.
Yes. And one last thing on this. If Austin had gone down pre-deadline, there would have been an interesting conversation about what the Braves might have done. You know what I mean? Like we would have had it on this podcast. If they had known on July 20th, 1 month earlier, that Austin was going to miss the rest of the season or rest of the regular season, we would have probably argued, I don't know about you, I would have probably argued that they had to do something proactive outside the organization to make a trade for someone who could play third base.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that player might have been better than Gio Urshela, but the Braves don't have that luxury. Once you get past August 1st, and we mentioned this on the podcast. I mean, you and I did, I know Steven and Sean did. On August 1, your team is your team, unless someone is out there on waivers or out there as a free agent. And generally speaking, guys that are available on waivers or in free agency in August haven't been good at least that season. Otherwise, they would not be available. So
right.
you're obviously doing a reclamation project. The Braves have had great success. I mean, I know we just talked about it, but you can't bet 1,000 on these little like marginal signings, but they have so far. I mean, Laureano and Merrifield have been better than anyone rationally could have expected them to be. And maybe Urshela will do that too. We'll see. And if not, it'll be Nacho or it'll be Merrifield or something else.
Yeah, and just one little side point here. With the playoffs expanding, there has been some talk of pushing the trade deadline back a couple of weeks. I mean, obviously you can never predict when a player is going to get hurt, but there has been talk of moving it back to maybe August 15th and splitting the difference from the old days of a July 31st deadline and then a August 31st waiver deadline. So maybe this will, I mean, it feels like there's push internally to get it moved back. And who knows, maybe if teams suffer enough injuries in the month of August, especially adding in those 2 extra playoff teams every year, maybe it'll happen and we'll see. But regardless, yes, I think to put a bow on this, Gio Urshela is a free see what happens, right? It's a free spin on the wheel and maybe you get nothing out of it. Maybe you get lucky and he's really good for a couple of weeks and fills in nicely. But overall, man, you just didn't have a lot of choices and you just have to hope that Gio gives you something.
Okay, Scott, we've prolonged it enough. Let us dive into Wednesday's 3-2 loss at the hands of the Phillies. It started out well. Max Fried and Orlando Arcia combined to give the Braves a 2-0 lead after Arcia went deep in the 4th inning. As noted previously, there was a little bit of speculation that he might have stared down Bryce Harper. Alas, but the offense was basically nothing other than that. They had some chances in the 3rd, in the 6th, and then I would say most famously probably in the 9th with 2 runners on. But before we get to Max Fried, it's pretty simple. The offense was not that good on Tuesday, but they did a little bit of enough. But you have to be perfect when you score 2 runs, and the Braves weren't perfect. That's basically all it is.
I'm going to talk out of both sides of my mouth here for a minute.
As one does.
And say this, right? Naturally. We do a lot of podcasts. On one hand, the Atlanta Braves have been very, very frustrating because I think now 5 of their last 6 losses have been by 1 run. And you can make a strong argument that a lot of those losses they should have won. They could have very easily won tonight. They could have very easily won in Anaheim. They could have won both games in Colorado, so on and so forth. So that is incredibly frustrating. On the other hand, you, I guess, can make a glass half full case that the fact that the Braves now are winning games better than they have in recent weeks. I think they've won 6 out of 9. And overall, they're playing better baseball. But the fact that the losses are only by 1 run more times than not would tell you that this team is playing better baseball. And at the end of the day, a loss counts all the same, whether it's 1 run or it's 10 runs. But the fact is, they have been a hit or two away in most of their recent losses from turning them into wins. And I think if you're trying to be optimistic, you tell yourself that this team has been in basically every game they have played lately. And you just have to hope that eventually it balances out and they continue to win games and win series. But again, man, at the same time, it is incredibly frustrating to watch these very close losses because we know how close the wild card race is. And presumably, if they want to try to get back in the East race, they're going to have to start winning more of these 50-50 games. But I guess it is a little encouraging that even when they are losing, they are of the 1 run variety, which is generally an indication that your team is playing good baseball.
I'm with you. And just for the full season, and there's probably a half-hour discussion that we will not have tonight about some of the metrics that are out there. I know I shared one of them this week on Twitter/X about how the Braves basically look like the unluckiest team in all of baseball this year, and the underlying stats would kind of point to that. Part of that story is that, a team's record in 1 run games is not entirely random, but it leans to the random side, if that makes sense. And currently the Braves are 13-19 in 1 run games. And that is the worst mark of any like playoff hopeful team in the National League.
Yeah, that'll do it. I mean,
yeah,
1 run
that's
games.
kind of what it is. Like, that's not like historically awful. Like I believe last year weren't the Padres like just like all time terrible in 1 run games. I'm looking at this.
Yeah,
now.
Padres were like 3-25 last year.
Yeah, they were like historically bad in those, and that's not the Braves haven't been that, but that explains part of it. And look, tonight, to bring it back to tonight, it was an execution loss. So the Braves had the single biggest swing of the game with the RCA home run. But the Phillies, and I'm painstakingly went through this, and I won't do it on the podcast, but all 3 of Phillies' runs were essentially ABC baseballed across. They got a couple hits early in innings, and then they had a bunch of sac flies and fielder's choices, and they manufactured runs, all 3 of them. And look, that's going to happen to you. You can't always assume. I do think that people, generally speaking, fans of the Braves and any other team, you can't always assume that every single guy that gets to the second base with no outs is going to score. It is harder than you think to get those runs across. But the Phillies made it happen 3 times, and those are all 3 of their runs. And the Braves, as I mentioned before, briefly earlier, had chances to score in the 3rd and the 6th, et cetera. In the 9th, they get 2 on, 1 out, down a run at the bottom of the 9th against a wobbly reliever, it seemed like, for Philadelphia. We'll only do this once, but I thought it was pretty clearly ball 4 to Michael Harris, and that was called a strike, and that was basically a pivotal moment in the game. But even then, putting that to the side, Harris and Merrifield had 2 of the weaker ground balls you'll ever see to end the game. And there you have it. So I don't want to overemphasize it or overanalyze it, I guess, but one team took advantage of their opportunities when they got early hits and innings, and it was the Phillies, not the Braves. Tonight.
Yeah. I mean, and you know what? It's like an old basketball analogy. One team made shots and the other team didn't. And
you're speaking my language now as a basketball podcaster, Scott. I cannot explain to you how many times over 82 games each year I have to explain to basketball fans that most of what happened in that game was that one team made shots, the other team didn't. It's just like,
yeah, baby.
Noise. Noise is part of all sports, but it's certainly the case.
And sometimes it's really simple, and it can be simple, but also like infuriating because especially lately, it feels like the Braves just have done an awful job executing in these close, low-scoring games, not getting that one hit. Tonight, Braves, Sean Murphy comes up with the bases loaded. If Murphy gaps a ball in the corner or gaps it or puts one in the corner, it's a bases clearing double, and the game looks entirely different. If Michael Harris lines a ball into the gap in the 9th inning, the Braves win the game.
Urshela's double play in the
Yeah,
sixth. Like,
if
yeah.
Gio hits the ball 5 feet to the right and it gets past the second baseman, the what would have been the go-ahead run at that time comes in to score. It sometimes it really is both as simple and frustrating as that. And I think you mentioned that one-run record. I tend to think that's something that's kind of fluky year over year.
It is.
I mean, I think you can probably make a case that good teams find ways to win baseball games. But at the same time, and again, sometimes it just comes down to one swing of the bat, one correct call by the home plate umpire. I mean, we're talking about the smallest of margins. And when you're in a playoff chase, those get amplified. And unfortunately, on Wednesday night, basically everything went against the Braves. And credit to the Phillies, who did a really fantastic job executing in the couple of chances they had to score runs.
Not to go down this rabbit hole too much, but 100% with you on the one run thing being kind of random and also not predictive necessarily, but also even the best teams in the league. Like I'm looking at the top four teams in Major League Baseball this year. Dodgers, Phillies, Brewers, Yankees have the four best records in the league, right? Uh, Only one of those teams is considerably over 500 in one-run games. The Brewers are 22 and 18, so they're not like lighting the world on fire. They're the best. Yankees are 15 and 15. The Phillies are 16 and 17. The Dodgers are 17 and 15. Like even the good teams don't win every one-run game. It's just not what it is. It's like the times that you kind of see that stand out are the teams that end up overperforming or underperforming their baselines. So last year's Padres underperformed. Last year's Orioles went 30 and 16 in one-run games, ended up winning 101 games despite a pretty modest run differential. Like there's always noise in there, and not an excuse. The Braves have to do better, as we just said repeatedly, but that is a part of what's happened this year, and the unlucky stuff is not a lot of fun to discuss. Oh, by the way, we left one off earlier. I think you mentioned this to me even. Jorge Soler popping up a middle fastball in the ninth, kind of adding to the injury. I know he's hurt, so I'll give him the reprieve, but that's a ball he usually crushes, and it just didn't happen.
Yeah. No, I mean, the Phillies were lucky that ball didn't go about 450 feet. Such is life. The one thing, Brad, we should talk about from Wednesday's loss that was, I thought, really encouraging was Max Fried.
Yep, I'm with you 100%. Take it there, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was the best that Max has looked since the elbow injury. Much better command, much more Max Fried-like on the mound. 7 innings, 4 hits, 2 runs, only 1 walk, which is good to see because command has been a real issue, and 4 strikeouts, and maybe most notably, 7 innings, 90 pitches is very much on brand for Max Fried when he is right. Whereas in his last couple of starts, it felt like he's needed 25 pitches every single inning. So a very, very encouraging sign for Max. We don't have to tell folks that the Braves need Max Fried and Chris Sale firing and healthy in a playoff series should they get there. And I mean, I was mildly concerned with Max after the maybe not great starts after the elbow injury, but I think tonight alleviated any of those concerns.
Right. If you asked me, like, what is the prototypical Max Fried start, it basically was today. 7 innings, 2 runs is like, an ERA below 3, which is like the Max Fried zone, right? Maybe you would say he would get like 6 Ks instead of 4. But 1 walk, 4 hits, facing a good lineup. You mentioned the 90 pitches. Like it was a pretty much square in the middle Max Fried start, which is really, really good. It's nice to have square in the middle starts when you have a guy who is like an unquestionable top 15 pitcher in baseball and has been for several years now. Him looking like that is not a small thing, especially given all the other noise around the Braves right now. So 100% with you. That was certainly the bright spot of the evening. If you had to find one, would be Max looking like Max. And that'll be huge because I know our guy, Mark Bowman, actually made an appearance on Foul Territory, the flagship show, and just basically said this plainly, like the Braves are going to win with their pitching from now on. And they have been all year, to their credit. All year have been pitching lights out basically, but even more so now without Austin and all that stuff. Like the magnifying glass is there, and we said it many times, but they kind of have to. They're going to go as far as like Sale and Fried and hopefully now Lopez and hopefully Schwellenbach tomorrow. We'll take them. Charlie Morton mixed in there as well. I have to say his name out loud, Scott. It's part
I
of the
was going to
podcast.
say, are you already counting Chuck out of the playoff rotation, Brad?
I don't know if you've seen Chuck the last couple starts, Scott, but absolutely not. Chuck
Yeah,
is back.
baby.
You have invigorated him by retiring him a couple weeks ago, which I will not let you forget. Anyway, we can move on, but it was nice to see Max look like
Yeah.
Max.
Yeah, it
Um,
was.
so not a ton of news. Obviously, we've done podcasts the last couple days. Soler did pinch hit in Tuesday's game and Wednesday's game. I don't know about you. He does not look like he's moving very well to me. It's a little bit concerning. They have circled Friday as like a target date for him to play some outfield or at least be in the lineup again. I don't know if I'm worried, to be honest. I did say on the show Sunday that I'd be worried if he didn't play on Tuesday, and I stand by that. But of course, he ended up pinch hitting 2 days in a row, so maybe it's not like too dangerous. But he just looks like he's not moving very well.
Yeah, I almost wonder if the training staff told him to swing hard, but like go 50% if you have to run.
What happened on Tuesday, he didn't even take the bat off his shoulder and walked,
Yeah.
which was fine. And then today, we both said it, but like he missed this pitch, but like it was the first pitch. He went up hacking like and took a massive cut. So I do tend to agree. Maybe they were like, hey, if you could just not single here, would be good.
Yeah, no infield singles for the love of God.
Yeah, if you hit the ball on the ground, just stop. Just walk to the dugout. It's fine. No big deal.
Yeah.
No, so we'll see. I mean, it's a big TBD. I would be surprised based on what he said, based on what Snit said, if he plays Thursday. They did say Friday on, I think, multiple occasions. But hopefully he's able to run and look like himself pretty soon because Soler at the plate's been great defensively. We know the story there, but that's one to circle because man, this is very obvious, but without Riley, need even more because Jorge Soler was supposed to be a bonus to the previous lineup. Now he's like filling the Austin Riley role in some respects. So yeah, good luck, Jorge.
Yeah, let's hope that hamstring is fine. Braves are going to need Jorge Soler big time these final 6 weeks of the season. And then a sad note about AJ Minter, maybe not sad note, and an expected note, but
Yeah.
nonetheless, AJ officially underwent hip surgery today. He is done for both the regular season and the playoffs. The Braves came out and said that today. So wish AJ Minter all the best. Hopefully he is back at 100%. Very curious to see what kind of contract and free agency AJ has in a couple of months. Because if you want to gamble on him being his good usual self, that is a very valuable reliever. But of course, this whole season has been kind of a lost year for him, and now he's having the surgery. So who knows? Maybe AJ will find himself back in Atlanta next season.
Right. And we gave the numbers on the episode right after he got hurt, and we kind of assumed this was going to be the case. And let's just say he has been one of the best relievers in baseball for several years. So beyond just the fact that he's had this value to the Braves, he's been really good. It's bad timing for him, for the team. The team is worse without him, no question about that. And kind of just a final punctuation mark on that, unfortunately, for all parties. But I'm sure he'll be around the team and rehabbing and hopefully ready to go when it comes to March and April of next year. The last thing before we sign off on this Wednesday evening is this series is going to the rubber match on Thursday. It is going to be Spencer Schwellenbach against Christopher Sanchez for the Phillies. It is a Fox national TV network game. So I don't believe there is going to be a Bally broadcast. I think it's only Fox National. So plan accordingly if you are trying to watch that game. Anything to look for in this one? Schwellenbach's our guy. We've loved what we've seen recently, but it's obviously a showdown that we're all kind of just circling, and it's close fought. There's not like a huge advantage to be had. It's just going to seem like every Braves Phillies game, coin flips kind of.
Yeah, should be a good pitching matchup. Schwellenbach against Christopher Sanchez, who is a lefty with a really unique profile. Doesn't get a lot of strikeouts. He also basically doesn't walk anybody. He's very much like a non-traditional pitcher in the modern era, but overall has really good numbers. Will probably get some Cy Young votes at the end of the season. So hopefully Schwellenbach is good as he has continued to be. And it just feels like in the sense of the National League East, if the Braves win the game, it's back down to a 6-game deficit, and that is more manageable than not. But if you lose on Thursday, then you're 8 games back. I mean, 6 games versus 8 games. Of course, it's not like a drastic difference, but just from like the mental standpoint, it feels like a win keeps the Braves in the division race. If they lose, for me anyway, it's probably time to really just focus in on the wild card.
We're already kind of there anyway, but I definitely agree. It's not over, and you will not hear me say that it is if they lose on Thursday. But the math starts to get ugly if they do. So you don't want to put it too much. It's not. We're not trying to say it's more meaningful than it is. It's just one game, but it is a head-to-head game. And just for the record, as of Wednesday evening, I'm looking at the betting market right now. The Braves are like the tiniest of favorites on Thursday, but it's basically a coin flip. It's like minus 108 and minus 112 toward the Braves. So it's basically a coin flip. Small edge for the home team, but that's kind of fitting for this series. And I'm sure if there is a game across baseball that people will watch the most tomorrow, it's going to be that one because it's national TV,
Yeah.
big showdown, and Spencer's biggest start of his career. You have to say. I mean, probably every start like is basically that from now on, but especially the Phillies in prime time, like that's going to be his biggest stage to date. Let's just say.
Yeah. And I mean, I just look forward to Spencer Schwallenbach Day.
Same.
I think most people do. Yeah. I mean, it's just so much fun to watch the rookie go out there and pitch. He throws strikes. He's just unbelievable in that regard at not walking people, which is just so important. So yeah, should be a good game. Let's hope the Braves can close it out with a series win and then turn their focus to the Nationals this weekend.
Absolutely. 3 against the Nats coming up beginning on Friday at home. We'll have full coverage of that going into the weekend. I think we're probably going to have a show between now and Friday at some point, something like that. I won't say exactly when it's going to come, but stay tuned for that. And please subscribe to the podcast. Scott, anything you want to share before we sign off?
Nothing to share, Brad. I hope everybody out there is doing well. I sincerely mean it when we say we appreciate the support on the show every single night, win or lose. And Brad, I think you and I will be back on Sunday night in our usual spot. So please be sure to keep an eye out for that. And yeah, man, let's go out. Let's try to win this series and keep the good energy rolling.
Yes, that is the plan. We will, as a pairing, see you all on Sunday. Please go ahead, as I said before, and subscribe to this show. Anywhere you find podcasts, I won't name all the places, but the big ones like Apple and Spotify for sure, Overcast. We are on YouTube as well. We are currently audio only. That could be changing at some point, but certainly we're already there to try to establish that channel. So please subscribe there. Even if you just want to click on that button to subscribe and never watch us there, I wouldn't mind that much. So help us to grow the show. Ratings, reviews, check out the flagship at Foul Territory. They also have a number of team podcasts that you can be listening to from the Phillies to the Dodgers, etc. If you want to hear more about the entire Major League Baseball landscape, check that show out for sure. Thank you to Scott for being here. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you all next time.